Welcome back, my team. Today's story is going to be a mix of wild and emotional moments. I never expected anything in my life to change the way that single online video did. Honestly, looking back now, it still feels strange, as if I stumbled into something meant for someone braver, more daring, more self-aware than I ever believed myself to be. But life has a funny way of pulling you toward whatever it thinks you need, even if you don't agree at the time. And that's exactly how it all began, with a tired evening, a restless mind, and a title glowing on my screen that I clicked without thinking twice. Your mind will accept. Total Gender Transformation Hypnosis. I remember staring at the words, feeling a faint and unexplainable spark in my chest. It wasn't fear or excitement. It was something in between, like a soft tug toward a door I had never noticed before. A door I wasn't sure I wanted to open, but one that felt strangely familiar, as if I had walked past it 1,000 times without daring to turn the handle. That night, I was sitting alone in my room after another long, monotonous day. I had been dragging myself through work, doing tasks that felt empty, coming home to a quiet apartment that felt even emptier. Everything had started blending together, day after day, until I felt like a shadow of myself. I wasn't sad, not exactly. It was more like I was disconnected, drifting, unsure who I even was anymore. My reflection didn't look unhappy, but it didn't look alive either. And maybe that's why the title hit me harder than it should have. Maybe deep down, I wanted something, anything, to shake me awake again. I clicked play. The video opened with a calm voice, steady and warm, like someone telling me they had been waiting for me. The visuals were simple, shifting patterns that moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, like soft waves in the dark. The voice told me to breathe, to relax, to let the tension sink away. I didn't expect to follow along. I had never been the type to fall for anything like hypnosis. But the strange thing was that my shoulders loosened, my heartbeat steadied, and the room seemed to quiet around me as if the voice could reach inside me and adjust the volume of my thoughts. I remember the moment when everything subtly changed. The voice began speaking about identity, about seeing parts of yourself you never knew were there, and about feeling safe enough to explore them. It was gentle, never pushing, never forcing, just guiding. The more I listened, the more I felt like the words were revealing something inside me, something I had buried or forgotten or never dared to acknowledge. There was no sudden shock, no dramatic revelation. It was like a soft shift, a quiet permission to wonder, what if I had sides of myself I had never allowed to grow? And then it started. Not a physical transformation, nothing supernatural or impossible, just a small but powerful emotional shift. The voice described imagining yourself differently, softer, freer, wearing clothes that you had always admired from afar but never imagined on your own body. The imagery was vivid but peaceful, fabrics brushing lightly against skin, colors that felt expressive and bright, a sense of ease and comfort that I had never allowed myself to feel. I didn't feel embarrassed. Strangely, it felt natural, like I had slipped into a version of myself that had been waiting patiently for acknowledgement. As the voice continued, I felt memories rising, times as a kid when I had been curious about clothes not meant for me, moments when I had admired how freely others expressed themselves, the quiet envy when I saw someone confidently exploring styles I wished I could try. These memories weren't painful, but they carried a weight I hadn't realized. I had dismissed them for years, convincing myself they were small, insignificant thoughts. But hearing them now made something inside me unlock, like a door I had pretended didn't exist. The voice said that transformation begins in the mind, in acceptance, in allowing yourself to imagine without fear. It wasn't promising change. It wasn't forcing anything. It was simply creating space I never knew I needed. As my mind drifted, I saw myself standing in front of a mirror, wearing clothes I had only secretly admired before, a simple, flowing top, soft leggings, a light touch of color on my face. Not exaggerated, not dramatic, just me but different. And for the first time, I didn't push the image away. I didn't feel ashamed of imagining it. I felt calm, in harmony with it. I didn't fall asleep, but the world felt distant, like I was submerged in warm water where everything sounded softer. When the video finally ended, I sat there in silence, unsure how long I had been still. My room looked the same, my reflection looked the same, but something inside me had undeniably shifted. My chest felt lighter, like tension I didn't know I carried had melted away. And most surprising of all, I didn't feel confused. I felt curious.
Awake.
A little scared, sure, but in a good way, like the kind of fear you feel before taking your first step onto a path you secretly always wanted to walk. I shut my laptop, but the thoughts didn't fade. They followed me as I brushed my teeth, as I laid in bed, as I stared at the ceiling replaying the soft, encouraging words from the video. What if that version of me wasn't imaginary? What if it was a part of me that had been waiting for years, quietly hoping for a moment like this? I didn't have answers. I didn't know what any of it meant. But I did know one thing. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be able to ignore it anymore. Something was beginning, something both tender and overwhelming, something I didn't yet understand but couldn't deny. And despite the uncertainty, despite the unfamiliar emotions swirling inside me, I felt a calm determination settle into my chest. Whatever this was, I needed to follow it. The next morning felt different before I even opened my eyes. It wasn't dramatic, nothing cinematic, but there was a quiet awareness sitting in my chest, like waking up with the faint memory of a dream that still clings to your skin. I lay there longer than usual, staring at the dim light on my ceiling, replaying the strange calm from the night before. I expected embarrassment to crash over me, or denial, or the usual habit of brushing things aside and pretending they never happened. But none of that came. Instead, I felt an odd kind of anticipation, a careful curiosity that made me sit up slowly, as if the air in my room had shifted just enough to make everything slightly new. I got out of bed and walked to the bathroom, avoiding the mirror at first out of some ingrained instinct to stay unchanged. But something inside me insisted I look. When I finally lifted my eyes to meet my own reflection, there was no sudden realization or shock, just a subtle feeling that I was seeing myself with an honesty I had avoided for years. My face looked the same as always, tired but familiar, yet I couldn't shake the sense that something behind the expression had stirred awake, like there was someone in there waiting to be acknowledged. The memory of the imagined reflection from the video, the softer clothes, the calmer presence, the quiet confidence, floated into my thoughts, and for once I didn't push it away. I splashed water on my face, trying to ground myself. Was this just lingering influence from the video? Some kind of psychological trick? Or had it simply revealed something I had buried for so long that seeing it again felt disorienting? Whatever the reason, the thoughts wouldn't go away. They followed me through breakfast, through the routine of preparing for work, through every repeated action of the morning that usually played out without a single interruption. Everything felt slightly off rhythm, as if my mind was working on something quietly in the background. When I stepped outside, the cold morning air hit my face in a way that almost felt refreshing. It cleared some of the fog in my thoughts, but it didn't make the sense of inner shift disappear. If anything, it sharpened it. As I walked to the bus stop, I found myself thinking about clothes, about colors, about expressions of identity I had always admired from afar but never dared to approach. Not in a longing way, not in a regretful way, more like the gentle consideration of a possibility that suddenly felt within reach. It was strange how natural the thoughts were, how peaceful they felt, like they had always been there waiting for the right moment to surface. Work dragged on as usual. People talked, computers hummed, keyboards clattered, and everyone seemed absorbed in their own daily routines. But I kept drifting back to the quiet internal shift. I caught myself wondering what it would feel like to really explore it, to try something small, something personal, something no one else had to know about yet. It wasn't about changing who I was overnight. It was about giving myself permission to be curious, to experiment with an idea that felt both foreign and familiar. Every time I tried to brush the thought aside, it would return with even more clarity, like it wasn't going to let me hide from it anymore. At lunch, I sat alone as usual, but instead of scrolling aimlessly on my phone, I found myself searching for stories, real stories, of people who had gone through similar struggles or discoveries. I wanted to know if anyone else had ever felt this quiet, persistent tug towards something they didn't fully understand. And the more I read, the more I realized that I wasn't as alone as I had believed. There were people who had spent years ignoring a part of themselves, people who had found comfort in clothing or expression that didn't fit the expectations others placed on them. And for many of them, the journey had started exactly the same way, with a small moment of curiosity that refused to fade. By the time work ended, my mind felt like it was buzzing with a quiet electricity, a sense of direction forming slowly, but unmistakably. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with these feelings, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending they didn't exist. And as I walked home, the idea came so naturally that it surprised me. I would stop by a store. Not to make any dramatic decisions, not to overhaul my wardrobe or declare anything to anyone. Just to look, to see what it felt like to be near the things I had always admired from a distance. The thought made my heart beat faster, not in fear exactly, but in a kind of tense excitement. A cautious step forward. A test to see if the calm I felt the night before had been real or just an illusion created by a hypnotic voice. The closer I got, the more my hands felt slightly shaky, but I didn't turn away. I kept walking until I stood in front of the entrance of a simple department store, bright windows, simple displays, nothing intimidating. But to me, in that moment, it felt like a threshold. I walked inside. My steps were slow, my breathing controlled, but I didn't feel like I was doing something wrong. I wasn't here to be reckless. I wasn't here to shock myself. I was here to understand something quietly growing inside me. I wandered through aisles, pretending to browse casually, even though I knew exactly where I wanted to go. And eventually, I found myself standing in front of a section I had always passed without looking too directly. The colors were softer, the fabrics lighter, the designs more expressive than anything in the part of the store labeled for me. I waited for embarrassment to rise, for panic, for guilt. It didn't. Instead, a strange calm washed through me, the same calm I had felt during the video. It was like the voice from last night had followed me here, whispering reassurance, reminding me that this was not something dangerous or shameful, just something human, something honest. I reached out and touched a simple top hanging at the edge of a display. Light gray, soft, with delicate stitching that felt soothing to run my fingers across. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. Just touching it made something inside me settle, as if acknowledging the possibility was enough for now. There would be time for more later. Time to explore, to understand, to find out what these feelings truly meant. As I walked home afterward, the world felt different around me. I felt different within it. Not transformed, not instantly changed, but grounded in a way I hadn't expected. I didn't know where this path would lead or how far it would take me, but I knew the first step had been taken. Quietly, carefully, courageously. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of something I had been missing for years. Hope, maybe. Or freedom. Or the smallest beginning of self-acceptance. Whatever it was, it felt right. The evening after my quiet visit to the store felt heavier and lighter at the same time, as if two different versions of myself were trying to understand each other. When I closed my apartment door behind me, I leaned against it for a long moment, feeling the weight of the day settle into my chest. Not a painful weight, more like the pressure that comes after taking a deep breath and finally allowing yourself to exhale. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sat at the table staring at nothing, just letting the emotions unfold at their own pace. The simple act of letting my hand brush that soft fabric in the store had changed something in me, something I couldn't ignore anymore. I found myself replaying the moment again and again. The way the fabric felt under my fingers. The sense of calm that washed over me. The strange familiarity of the emotions that surfaced. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It felt like recognition. Like rediscovering a language I had once spoken in dreams, but forgotten in waking life. And even though I wasn't ready to make any dramatic moves yet, the thought of exploring further didn't scare me the way it once would have. Instead, it filled my chest with a quiet warmth, a sense of gentle purpose. I went to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, looking around as though seeing the space through new eyes. My room had always been plain, practical, simple, never reflecting much of who I was, only what I thought I was supposed to be. But now, for the first time, I wondered what it might look like if I let myself express something deeper. Something softer. Something more honest. I didn't know what that meant yet, but the idea alone felt like a door cracking open. As night settled in, I found myself searching again for stories, for voices, for others who had walked a similar path of questioning and discovery. I wasn't seeking labels or definitions. I wasn't looking for answers that would lock me into anything. I was just looking for understanding, moments that mirrored the quiet shift happening inside me. And the more I read, the more I realized that identity wasn't a single moment of clarity, but a long, winding journey. A gradual blending of emotions, memories, experiences, and choices. Some people described it as peeling away layers until they finally reached their true self. Others described it as building something new, piece by piece. For me, it felt like both. Hours passed without me realizing it. The quiet of my apartment wrapped around me like a soft blanket, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone in my thoughts. Eventually, though, the curiosity that had been simmering inside me all day surfaced with new determination. I found myself thinking again of the soft gray top I had touched earlier, the calm I had felt, the gentle courage that had carried me into that aisle. A thought came into my mind so suddenly that it startled me. Maybe tomorrow I could actually buy something. The idea made my heart beat faster. Not in fear exactly, but in a mixture of excitement and vulnerability. I sat with the feeling for several minutes, trying to understand it. Buying something wouldn't change my life. It wouldn't alter who I was in an instant, but it would be a step forward. A choice. A promise that I was willing to explore this growing part of myself instead of running from it. And somehow, that felt important. I wasn't sure if I would have the courage when the moment arrived, but at least now, the possibility existed. That night, when I finally went to bed, sleep came slowly. Not because I was anxious, but because my mind wouldn't stop wandering through possibilities, memories, and feelings I had never allowed myself to explore before. I thought about the video again, the calm voice, the soft encouragement, the invitation to let myself imagine freely. It hadn't forced anything on me. It had simply given me permission to listen to a part of myself I had been ignoring for too long. And now that I had heard it, I couldn't unhear it. I didn't want to. When sleep finally came, it was gentle, filled with vague, soothing images rather than clear dreams. And when I woke the next morning, I felt a strange clarity settle over me. The uncertainty was still there, but it didn't feel frightening. It felt manageable. I got ready for the day with a sense of quiet determination. I didn't know if today would be the day I took that next step, but I knew I wanted to try. Work passed in a blur again, my mind drifting between tasks. Every break, every spare moment, the thought returned. Maybe today. Maybe I could walk back into that store, hold that soft gray top in my hands, and actually bring it home. Not to show anyone. Not to announce anything. Just to keep as a small, personal symbol of the journey I was beginning. When the day finally ended, I found myself walking the same route as before, my steps slow and contemplative. The sky had already grown dim, streetlights flickering on one by one. The store appeared ahead, its warm interior lights spilling through the windows onto the sidewalk. My heart pounded, but my feet kept moving. I stood at the entrance for a long moment, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. This time it felt different. I wasn't pretending to browse. I wasn't trying to blend into the background. I walked straight to the section that had called to me the day before. My pulse quickened as I approached the display, but the calm that washed over me when I reached it was unmistakable. I searched for the soft gray top I had touched, and when I found it, I lifted it gently off the rack. Holding it in my hands made the moment real in a way that touching it hadn't. The fabric was just as soft as I remembered, the design simple but subtly expressive. I ran my thumb along the seam, feeling a mix of emotions swell in my chest. Fear, excitement, tenderness, a strange sense of belonging. I didn't rush. I didn't force myself to decide quickly. I simply stood there, holding the garment, letting myself feel everything honestly. And then, with a steady breath, I walked to the register. The cashier didn't react, didn't question, didn't seem to think anything unusual. They scanned the top, bagged it neatly, told me the total, and that was that. A simple, ordinary transaction. But to me, it felt like one of the most meaningful moments of my life. When I stepped out of the store with a small shopping bag in my hand, the cool night air touched my face softly, almost like a quiet congratulations. I walked home slowly, feeling the weight of the bag and the gentle flutter of emotions inside me. I had taken a real step, a small one, yes, but real nonetheless. At home, I set the bag on my bed, staring at it for a long time before finally opening it. When I lifted the top out, it looked different somehow. Not just a piece of clothing, but a symbol of courage I never knew I had. I held it against myself for a moment, feeling a warm pressure in my chest, an emotional mix I couldn't fully put into words.
I didn't try it on yet.
I wasn't ready for that moment, but I folded it carefully and placed it in my drawer, knowing that someday soon, I would be. And as I turned off the light and headed to bed, I felt something quietly powerful grow inside me. Not certainty, not clarity, but something better. Acceptance. The next morning, I woke with a strange combination of anticipation and nervousness that I hadn't felt in years. The soft gray top I had bought the night before lay neatly folded in my drawer, and I found myself staring at it for longer than I expected. I didn't rush to wear it, but I wanted to touch it again, to feel the texture between my fingers, to acknowledge the small but profound step I had taken. It was more than a piece of clothing. It was a symbol of the permission I had given myself, a tangible reminder that exploration didn't have to be dramatic or public to be meaningful. The day at work passed in a blur, but my mind kept returning to the top. I imagined it against my skin, the way the fabric would move with me, the subtle shift in posture it might inspire, the quiet comfort of wearing something that felt like an extension of my curiosity. There was no rush, no overwhelming need to transform immediately. It was a slow unfolding, a gradual letting in of a side of myself I had ignored for too long. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty or anxious about it. I simply felt aware, conscious, and oddly empowered. By the time I got home, the air outside had grown crisp, the faint smell of rain lingering in the streets. I entered my apartment with a strange mixture of calm and excitement, my steps measured, as if approaching a delicate moment that needed to be handled carefully. I opened my drawer and lifted the top again, running my fingers along the fabric. I held it against my chest for a long moment, breathing slowly, letting the warmth of my own curiosity settle into my bones. And then quietly I slipped it over my head. It fit perfectly. Not too loose, not too tight. The softness of the fabric against my skin made me catch my breath slightly, a delicate flutter of emotion rising that was neither shame nor embarrassment, but something entirely new, comfort. I stood in front of my mirror slowly, studying my reflection. It was still me, the same person I had been yesterday, but something had shifted subtly. My posture softened. My shoulders relaxed. My expression was calmer, more present. The reflection staring back at me was familiar, yet undeniably different. I felt seen not by anyone else, not yet, but by myself. And that recognition carried an unexpected weight, a quiet gravity I hadn't realized I was craving. As I lingered in front of the mirror, I started experimenting gently with small details. I tugged lightly at the sleeves, adjusted the neckline, shifted the hem of the top. Each movement felt like discovering a secret about my body, about the way I existed in space, about the small, powerful gestures that expressed identity without words. I even traced my fingers along my jawline and cheeks, feeling the contours of my face with new awareness. It wasn't about changing who I was, it was about noticing, appreciating, understanding. Every small observation deepened the sense of alignment I felt with this quiet, emerging version of myself. Hours passed, though I hardly noticed. I read, I paced, I adjusted, I observed. Sometimes I caught myself smiling softly, realizing that the sense of curiosity and gentle exploration I had been suppressing for years wasn't just alive, it was thriving. The quiet thrill of self-discovery was intoxicating in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was subtle, almost meditative, but deeply transformative in the most personal sense. That night, I finally fell asleep with the top lying folded neatly beside my bed, feeling an odd mixture of anticipation and peace. I dreamed vividly, not in the chaotic, fragmented way my dreams often unfolded, but with clarity and cohesion. In my dreams, I walked through streets I knew, but the people around me were blurred, soft-edged, almost like memories of faces I hadn't seen for years. And I was wearing different outfits, simple and flowing, colorful and subtle, each one allowing a part of me to breathe in ways that the world hadn't permitted before. The dreams were not fantastical. They were gentle, grounded, almost ordinary, but in them, I felt entirely myself. When I woke, I made a quiet decision. Today, I would take a slightly bolder step. Not public yet, not in front of strangers or colleagues, but a step that would challenge the boundaries I had carefully constructed for myself. I wanted to explore not just the clothing, but the way it felt to move through my own space as this emerging version of me. To inhabit it fully, even in private. The anticipation made my heart race, a quiet, steady drumbeat that reminded me I was alive, fully awake, fully present. I spent the morning in a slow, deliberate ritual of self-expression. I chose another piece of clothing from my drawer, soft and simple, that complemented the gray top. I combined them carefully, noticing the textures, the way the fabrics brushed against my skin, the slight shift in posture and balance as I moved. Each action was deliberate, intentional, and deeply satisfying. It wasn't about impressing anyone, performing an identity, or achieving some external standard. It was about alignment, recognition, and the quiet joy of inhabiting my own space with honesty. I lingered in front of the mirror for nearly an hour, adjusting, observing, experimenting. The reflection staring back at me no longer felt unfamiliar or threatening. It felt like a companion I had finally met after years of avoidance. And I realized, with a quiet intensity, that this journey wasn't about instant transformation or revelation. It was about patience, curiosity, and courage. The courage to explore even when the world didn't notice, even when the path felt uncertain, even when the steps were small. By the time the evening arrived, I felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Not because I had done anything grand or visible, but because I had acknowledged, nurtured, and accepted a part of myself that had been dormant for too long. The top, simple and soft, lay folded beside my bed once more, a small, tangible symbol of progress and permission. And for the first time in years, I felt a gentle confidence settling into my chest. Not loud, not performative, just steady, calm, and grounding. As night fell, I reflected on how far I had come in just a few days. From a single video to a quiet journey of curiosity, recognition, and small, meaningful actions, I had begun a transformation that was entirely my own. Not dramatic, not sudden, not forced, but authentic, deliberate, and profoundly personal. And as I drifted into sleep, I felt a sense of anticipation for the days ahead, not for instant change, but for continued discovery, growth, and the quiet unfolding of a life finally lived on my own terms. The following morning, I woke with the faint hum of excitement still lingering from the night before. Something had shifted inside me in ways I couldn't yet articulate. The soft gray top, now no longer just a symbol but a part of my personal narrative, seemed to invite me into the next step of exploration.
I didn't rush.
I simply allowed myself to acknowledge the curiosity rising like sunlight spilling into a dim room. For the first time in years, I felt ready to challenge the boundaries I had so carefully built around my identity. I decided that today would be the day I would venture a little further. Not into public spaces yet, not into anything that might feel exposing, but further into the experience of inhabiting the softer, more expressive version of myself. I chose a different top from my growing small collection, a pale, gentle color, simple lines, subtle stitching. I paired it with a pair of leggings that fit comfortably and moved naturally with me. As I slipped into the clothing, I noticed a slight tremor in my fingers, not from fear but from anticipation. My reflection in the mirror looked familiar, yet undeniably different. I felt more present, more grounded, more aware of the small but powerful details that made me feel alive. I spent the morning moving through my apartment with intention, noticing the way my posture shifted, the way my movements felt lighter, softer, more natural. Every small gesture, every adjustment, seemed to reinforce the quiet confidence I was cultivating. It wasn't performance. It wasn't an attempt to prove anything to anyone. It was simply the act of inhabiting my own space authentically, of acknowledging a version of myself I had long neglected. I ran my fingers along my hair, gently adjusting it, noticing the subtle change in how I held my head. Each action carried significance I couldn't yet fully explain, but I could feel it, resonating deep within me. By midday, I felt a pull to step outside. Not far, not into crowded areas, but enough to test the boundaries I had set for myself. I chose a quiet park nearby, a place I had walked countless times but never really noticed. The moment I stepped into the open air, I felt a rush of both anxiety and exhilaration, a tension I had long since buried beneath routines and habits. Each step was deliberate, each breath conscious, as if I were learning to inhabit my own body in a way I had never been taught. The wind brushed against my face, and I felt a subtle thrill at the sense of visibility, even though the park was mostly empty. For the first time, I realized that the world hadn't changed. I had. I found a secluded bench and sat, watching the soft movement of the trees, the faint ripple of the water nearby. My heart was racing, not in panic, but in awareness. I thought about how far I had come in such a short time, from a single video, a quiet night of reflection, a hesitant visit to a store, to this, sitting in the park wearing clothing that felt like a quiet declaration of self. I let the emotions wash over me, acknowledging them without judgment. There was a mix of fear, yes, but also pride, relief, and a deep, satisfying sense of authenticity. As I sat there, I found myself imagining the future, not in overwhelming, impossible leaps, but in small, meaningful steps. Maybe tomorrow I would explore another clothing style. Maybe I would experiment with small details like color, texture, or movement. Maybe next week I would try to share this aspect of myself with a trusted friend. The possibilities felt endless, not intimidating, because for the first time, I understood that the journey wasn't about instant transformation. It was about small, deliberate acts of recognition and acceptance. Time passed almost unnoticed. I lingered on the bench, feeling the quiet hum of life around me and the steady beat of my own heart. Each sensation, each thought, each subtle acknowledgement of self felt profoundly important. I realized that this journey wasn't just about clothing or appearance. It was about identity, awareness, and the courage to explore aspects of oneself that had long been ignored. It was about patience, curiosity, and the quiet courage it took to be honest with oneself. When I finally walked home, the sun was beginning to dip, casting a warm, golden light over the streets. I felt a quiet triumph, not because I had done anything grand or public, but because I had taken another step. Each action, each choice, each acknowledgement of self added up, creating momentum I hadn't realized I could feel. The gray top and the pale top I wore that day were more than clothing. They were markers of progress, small yet powerful affirmations of my evolving journey. That evening, as I prepared for bed, I reflected on how far I had come in a week. From a single, hypnotic video to quiet personal exploration, to venturing into spaces that had once felt off-limits, I had begun to weave a new narrative for myself. A narrative built not on fear, avoidance, or shame, but on curiosity, acceptance, and authenticity. I folded the clothing carefully, placing them in my drawer like treasures, and lay down to sleep with a sense of anticipation and peace. Sleep came slowly but deeply, filled with gentle, comforting dreams of self-expression and discovery. For the first time, I felt like the journey ahead was mine to navigate, fully and authentically. The next steps were uncertain, yes, but no longer frightening. They were possibilities waiting to be explored, small moments of courage and acceptance that would continue to shape the path I had begun. And as I drifted into slumber, I realized something profound. This journey, this quiet transformation, was not about changing who I was. It was about finally allowing myself to be fully seen by the person who had always been there, waiting quietly to be acknowledged. The next morning, I woke with a quiet sense of determination. The previous week had been a revelation, a slow unfolding of curiosity, acceptance, and subtle transformation, but today felt different. Today felt like an opportunity to step even further into this emerging version of myself. I didn't rush. I didn't force anything. I simply let myself wake, stretch, and acknowledge the soft thrill of possibility that had been quietly growing inside me. I opened my drawer and looked at the tops I had chosen so carefully, each one a small milestone in my personal journey. Today, I selected the soft gray top again, pairing it with a pair of leggings that moved naturally with me and allowed me to feel grounded in my body. The act of dressing had become a ritual, a deliberate acknowledgement of who I was becoming. Each fabric against my skin, each adjustment in the mirror, was a quiet act of self-affirmation. I noticed the way my shoulders relaxed, the way my posture shifted, the subtle softening of my expression. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't performative. It was authentic, a reflection of the internal alignment I had been cultivating. I spent the morning moving slowly through my apartment, noticing how the clothing made me feel, how my body responded to simple gestures, how my mind registered the subtle changes in perception. The top was no longer just a garment. It was a companion, a tool, a symbol of permission and self-acceptance. I felt a quiet pride in the small steps I had taken, in the courage it had required to simply acknowledge and inhabit this version of myself. By midday, I knew I wanted to test my confidence in a broader space. Not in a crowded area, not in front of strangers, but in a setting that allowed me to stretch my comfort zone gently. I decided to revisit the small cafe nearby, a place I had often passed without thinking twice. I didn't know why this place felt significant, only that it offered a bridge between private exploration and the public acknowledgement of self. The walk there was deliberate, each step steady, each breath measured, a meditation in motion. When I entered the cafe, I felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but it was tempered by an unwavering sense of self-awareness. I chose a small table near the window, away from the main crowd, and sat. As I sipped my coffee, I allowed myself to observe my surroundings with fresh eyes. The way sunlight streamed across the table, the subtle murmur of conversation, the gentle movements of people around me. I noticed how my presence felt different in this space, more assured, more grounded, more aligned with the quiet confidence I had been nurturing. Time passed slowly, intentionally. I allowed myself to linger, to feel the weight of the moment, to embrace the subtle thrill of inhabiting this emerging self without apology. The cafe, once ordinary, became a space of reflection, observation, and self-recognition. I realized that transformation wasn't a single moment, nor was it a destination. It was a continuous journey, composed of small, deliberate acts of self-awareness, acceptance, and courage. Each choice, each acknowledgement, each small step reinforced the path I had begun. When I walked home, the sun had begun to dip, casting a warm glow over the streets. I noticed how differently I moved, how subtly my awareness had shifted, how the world seemed less imposing and more inviting. The soft gray top, the leggings, the quiet attention to detail, they were no longer just experiments. They were part of my daily practice of self-expression, authenticity, and alignment. I realized that the journey of transformation was not about external validation, but about internal honesty, about giving myself permission to be fully seen by the person I had always been beneath the surface. That evening, I sat in my room and reflected on the past week. From a single hypnotic video to quiet, deliberate acts of self-exploration, to venturing into public spaces in small, controlled ways, I had begun a transformation that was deeply personal, profoundly grounding and undeniably empowering. I felt gratitude for the small steps, the subtle shifts, the gentle courage it had taken to embark on this path. I felt pride not in outward changes, but in the internal alignment, the quiet acknowledgement of self, and the continuous unfolding of authenticity. As night fell, I carefully folded the soft gray top and placed it in my drawer alongside the other garments that had become symbols of courage, exploration, and acceptance. I lay down to sleep with a sense of completion, not of the journey itself, but of the day's intentional acts. Sleep came deeply, gently, filled with dreams of soft fabrics, quiet spaces, and the subtle joy of self-recognition. In those dreams, I moved freely, unburdened by fear or expectation, fully inhabiting the emerging version of myself with quiet confidence and peace. And as I woke the following morning, I knew the journey would continue. It would not be linear, it would not be simple, but it would be mine, shaped by curiosity, acceptance, courage, and the quiet determination to explore, recognize, and honor every part of myself. Each step, no matter how small, reinforced the path I had begun, and I welcomed it fully, gratefully, and without hesitation. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel.